It's fascinating how history plays out, isn't it? You have the winners supposedly writing the narrative, but
Mhm.
then sometimes those winners realize they actually need something from the losers.
Especially their brains, their expertise.
Exactly. And that brings us to this really surprising story after World War II, the U.S. secretly bringing over Nazi scientists.
Yeah, around 1,600 of them, give or take,
Right.
between 45 and 59.
Right.
It wasn't just a handful.
And the secrecy around it. Operation Paperclip, they called it.
Right. And this wasn't just about, grabbing some blueprints. It was a strategic play. Get their top minds working for America, especially with the Cold War starting to bubble up.
So that's what we're digging into today, trying to understand why they did it, this secret operation, and how people felt about it, because the reactions were all over the place.
Absolutely. And the results, I mean, you're talking major contributions, the Apollo moon landing, medical advances, aircraft design. It's huge.
It really is. So let's start at the beginning. How did this whole idea even get off the ground?
Well, it actually started during the war, even before Germany surrendered. There was this top secret mission called Operation Ulsos,
Also, okay, what was that about?
basically intelligence gathering. The U.S. wanted to know everything about Germany's advanced weapons. The V-2 rocket was a big one, first man-made thing in space.
Oh, yeah.
And they were also looking into their biological warfare research. The U.S. knew Germany was pretty far ahead in some areas.
So, ULSA's was the recon mission. Then what?
Then, in 1945, as the war was ending, they set up specific groups: the Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency, JIOA, and the Army's Counterintelligence Corps, the CIC.
Their job.
Find these key German scientists, the ones behind the V-2s, the jets, all the cutting-edge stuff. Find them and interrogate them.
Okay, but here's the rub, right? This technology is amazing, potentially game-changing,
Mm-hmm.
but the people who built it, some of them were deeply involved with the Nazi regime, maybe even involved in, horrific war crimes like experiments on prisoners.
Exactly. That was the massive dilemma. This incredible tech versus the dark past of the scientists. How do you weigh that? Especially when you're looking over your shoulder at the Soviets.
It's a terrible calculation to have to make.
And the solution they landed on was Operation Paperclip, this secret plan to bring them to the U.S. The justification, national interest, Cold War competition was ramping up fast.
And we should be clear, right? These weren't all just scientists forced to work. Some sources say many were actually ardent Nazis committed to the ideology.
That's a crucial point. It wasn't just about their scientific skill. It was about who they were, which makes the whole process of bringing them in even more, well, complicated.
So how did they manage that? You can't just put an ad out, former Nazi scientists wanted for U.S. government work.
Definitely not. It was tricky. The Immigration and Nationality Act of 1952 actually helped, perhaps unintentionally.
How so?
It had clauses allowing visas for people with urgently needed skills, particularly higher education. And these scientists, PhDs in rocket science, physics, medicine, they fit the bill.
So there was a legal justification they could sort of use.
Kind of a loophole, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But the actual process, that was kept
Mm-hmm.
very quiet. They had immigration consultants set up near the borders, Mexico, Canada.
Yeah.
U.S. military officials, dressed in civilian clothes, would basically escort the scientists to these consultants. They'd get their papers, often resident alien status initially, and slip into the country. All very discreet.
Trying to avoid any public outcry, presumably. But did it work? What were the initial reactions, say, between 44 and 47?
Oh, there was definitely outcry.
Mm-hmm.
Especially early on, a lot of people were not happy.
In what ways?
Well, within academia, there was strong ethical pushback. Many scholars felt bringing these scientists over just wasn't right. It undermined American values, ignored their potential war crimes. It looked bad.
I can imagine. Like, how could the government that just fought the Nazis turn around and hire them?
Exactly. There was this piece in the Journal of Medical Ethics by Gershon Grunfeld, really hammering the point that using any data from Nazi human experiments was totally unethical, period.
And that's become a pretty standard view in medical ethics now, hasn't it? The idea that you can't benefit from that kind of horror.
Very much so. It touches on the rights of the victims,
Right.
even after death. Though it's worth noting there were other perspectives, trying to understand the context, not excuse it.
Like who?
Someone like Edward Zukowski argued carefully that maybe we shouldn't judge the research intent too harshly if the goal was, bettering their nation. Again, absolutely not condoning the methods. It just shows the complexity people were grappling with.
A very fine line to walk there. What about the press? What were they saying?
The press was pretty loud early on. Walter Winchell, the columnist. Back in 44, he was furious about the idea of Nazis setting foot in America.
And he wasn't alone.
No. The New York Times read a piece in '46 pointing out Nazi scientists working at Wright Field in Ohio. The reporter called them pets of Hitler. Pretty scathing language.
Wow. So not hiding their feelings, did scientists themselves speak out?
Oh, yes. The Federation of American Scientists, a serious group they met with President Truman in '47, they called Paperclip a drastic step.
Strong words.
They basically asked, how can you trust someone who changes sides just for a meal ticket? They even compare them to Judas, who was a powerful moral stand from within the scientific community.
And didn't Einstein have reservations too?
Yeah, reports say Albert Einstein strongly disapproved of giving these scientists citizenship. So the initial wave was definitely negative, a lot of moral outrage.
But things started to change, didn't they, as the Cold War really took hold, say from the late 40s through the 70s?
They did. The fear of the Soviet Union, especially their technological progress, became a huge factor. It started to shift the narrative.
How did that show up?
Well, remember that critical New York Times article from '46? Just a year later, in '47, another Times piece comes out. This one highlights how these scientists could save the U.S. 10 years of research time.
Ah, the practical argument. National security.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And notice the language shift. Suddenly, they're mostly German scientists, not Nazi scientists. That's not accidental.
Reframing them. Making them seem less threatening, more valuable.
Precisely. This later article even paints them as almost heroic, working for low wages, practically volunteers for America's benefit. It's quite a turnaround from pets of Hitler.
A complete PR shift, but was everyone buying it?
Not entirely. You still had pushback. In 1950, someone wrote a letter to the editor basically saying, hey, we're fighting a war in Korea. We need money for our military tech, not for subsidizing these guys.
Eh.
So practical economic arguments against the two.
Makes sense. Keep the focus on immediate needs.
But the positive spin kept gaining ground. By 1958, you see newspaper articles praising the German and Austrian scientists at Wright Air Development Center. They'd name-drop the guy who designed the first jet engine, the first guided missile.
Highlighting the wins.
And crucially, they'd mentioned that the Soviets were also trying to recruit them, positioning it as, look, if we don't use them, our enemy will. That's a powerful Cold War argument.
The better us than them logic. Still, did the underlying discomfort about their past just vanish?
Not completely. You get reminders. Like in 1961, there was an incident in Boston where an American Nazi sympathizer was actually stoned by a crowd. It shows the public hadn't just forgotten or forgiven everything associated with Nazis.
A visceral reaction, yeah.
And even in '65, another New York Times piece was critical, calling the whole denazification process in Germany a disaster and finding it bizarre that the U.S. government then turned around and hired these scientists.
So, still some cognitive dissonance being pointed out.
Definitely. But then you fast forward to 1972, an article in the Air University Review. This one flat out argues Paperclip was vital for winning the Cold War, essential for creating the atomic bomb. National security above all else.
So that period, 48 to 77 roughly, it's really a mixed bag. You see this constant tension between the ethical worries and the stark realities or perceived realities of the Cold War.
Exactly. A real tug of war in public opinion.
What about more recently, say from the late 70s until now? Has time healed things or brought more clarity?
Not necessarily healed, I'd say. The ethical debates are still very much alive. With more information available now, more historical research, the scrutiny hasn't gone away. If anything, it's more informed.
And that language issue, Nazi versus German, that still matters in how we talk about it today, doesn't it?
Absolutely. How we label them often signals our stance on the whole program's morality. It's still sensitive.
It's also worth remembering the U.S. wasn't the only one doing this, right?
No, not at all. Britain had its programs, the Soviets definitely did. They were all scrambling for this German scientific talent after the war. And apparently, some scientists were savvy enough to use that competition to their advantage, playing offers against each other.
Adds another layer of complexity. Okay, maybe we can make this more concrete by looking at probably the most famous name associated with Operation Paperclip. Wernher von Braun.
Ah, von Braun. Yes, he's really the poster child for the whole dilemma.
Because on one hand, he was crucial to the Nazi V-2 rocket program, a member of the Nazi Party, even an SS officer.
SS Sturmbandsführer, yeah. Not just a low-level member.
But on the other hand, he becomes the driving force behind the Saturn V rocket, the rocket that took Americans to the moon, celebrated as the father of space travel.
It's an incredible contradiction. And his legacy is still fiercely debated. Did he get a pass on his past because America needed his genius for the space race? Or should we focus on the monumental achievement of Apollo?
There's no easy answer there. He surrendered to the Americans in 45 with his brother.
Yes, deliberately sought out the American forces.
Yeah.
His initial time in the U.S. working for the Army, apparently it was a bit frustrating for him.
How so?
He was used to the massive resources and, frankly, the slave labor at Peenemünde, where they built the V-2s. The U.S. Army program felt slow, under-resourced by comparison, plus just the cultural shift of being in America.
But he adapted. He became quite the salesman for space travel, didn't he? Collaborating with Walt Disney.
He really did. Those Disney TV specials in the 50s,
Yeah.
huge impact. They made space travel seem exciting, achievable. Von Braun was front and center, explaining it all. He really helped build public support, even pushed for a mission to Mars way back then.
A visionary in that sense. But his past didn't just disappear. Didn't it resurface later? Something about the V2 production.
Yes, in 1984, there was a lot more focus on his connection to middle work. That was the underground factory where they used concentration camp prisoners as forced labor to build the V2s under horrific conditions. How much did von Braun know? How involved was he? Those questions came back strongly.
So the shadow was always there.
Always. You see it reflected in things like a gymnasium in Germany being named after him, then later renamed after protests. Huntsville, Alabama, where he did so much work for NASA, still has the von Braun Center. He got top awards, the National Medal of Science. But the Nazi connection is undeniable.
It really encapsulates the whole paperclip story.
Hmm.
Incredible scientific achievement intertwined with a deeply problematic past. I read he also wrote about faith and science later in life.
He did, adding yet another dimension to him. It just shows how complex these individuals and the whole situation really were.
So wrapping this up, Operation Paperclip, who was born from war, fueled by the Cold War.
A program driven by perceived necessity, by the race for technological supremacy.
But it forced the U.S. into this really uncomfortable ethical corner, and the public reaction over the decades shows just how conflicted people were and maybe still are.
That's the core of it, isn't it? This fundamental tension. How far do you go for progress, for national security? What lines are you willing to cross?
And what are the long-term costs of crossing them?
Precisely. So the question maybe for you, the listener, to think about is, what does this episode in history tell us about making those kinds of choices in crisis? How do we as societies reckon with decisions made under pressure that have these deep, lingering moral ambiguities? Where do you draw the line between pragmatism and principle?